All the rolling go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today's podcast, we are going to be at the C.M. Russell Museum, which is the Charles Russell Artist Museum in Great Falls, Montana. This is going to be a little bit different podcast, as we were asked if we could do the podcast with a group of tourists that were at the museum, and they were really pressed for time, so they asked if we would just record what we had as far as a tour guide. The tour guide was great. She was a lot of fun and very, very knowledgeable. It is a shorter podcast, does not do the museum justice as far as the total museum, but it does give a pretty good overview of Charlie Russell's life and the events around his paintings. I hope you enjoy, and hopefully it's not too disjointed as far as it sounding like it's a tour. It is. There were two parts. After the tour was done, Christina spent time with me, and we talked about a couple of other paintings and a couple of other things that's a little bit more interactive. Hope you enjoy the podcast today.
All right, for better or worse, you guys are with me. Again, my name is Christina. I've worked at the museum for 9 years now. I oversee our docent program. So how many of you are from Great Falls? How many of you have been to our museum in the last 10 years? In the last 5 years? Ooh, gold stars. Good job. Perfect. Are you all, okay, so Great Fallsians, don't care about you anymore. Those of you who are not from Great Falls, are you familiar with Charlie Russell? On a heard his name before to I've read all the books. Heard his name before? Seen some artwork? Okay, perfect. I've already forgotten your name.
Loren.
Loren, this is Loren. He's our podcast guest.
And our podcast is Where Am I to Go? And we're at the C.M. Russell Museum, just so that the listeners can catch up with where we're at.
There you go. I figured you'd edit all of this out. Okay, perfect. Well, I hope today I can share with you a little bit about Charlie Russell for those of you who know about him, maybe something you don't know. And then we'll also talk about a lot of his artwork, the history behind it, some of the things that I find interesting in his pieces. There are pieces that I stop to talk about because I like them. I'm the tour guide. I get to make that choice. If, however, there's something you guys see from across the room that you would like to go and look at, please don't hesitate to say, hey, that one looks really cool. Could we please go over there and have you tell us about it? And I'll say, maybe. Usually I'll say yes. Or I might say, yeah, absolutely. I don't know much about that painting, but let's go look at it together. Or you can just go look at it on your own. It's up to you. Cool? All right, let's go inside.
So as we enter here, you come in through the guest shop. Guest shop.
Enter through the gift shop.
Gift shop.
Exit through the gift shop.
And
most importantly.
Ooh, both places.
Exit through.
And as you come into the main lobby, the first thing you see is a lot of pictures of Charles Russell with his normal life, I guess you could say. There's pictures of him on the range and photographs, not necessarily his paintings.
Yes, yep, there's photographs of Charlie, kind of a montage that we have out in our lobby. I'm sorry, I stopped us here, but we're going to keep going. We're going to walk through this gallery. We will come back and look at this gallery in a few minutes, but I want to give us a little space from them. So let's walk through.
Now, I've always said I would never do an art museum because you cannot describe art, but Charlie Russell has always been one of my absolute favorites, and there's so much Western history that goes along with his life that I decided to break protocol.
Perfect,
come
yes.
here and take a look.
This is a great one because the paintings are tell a history. And so they're not abstract at all. They're very easily described, I like to say. But first, let's give a little background on Charlie Russell, okay? So Charles Marion Russell was born in 1864 in St. Louis, Missouri. And he was actually born to a fairly wealthy family. A lot of people have this notion of the cowboy artist who kind of pulled himself up by his own bootstraps and became a success all on his own. Well, that's not entirely true. His family was quite well-to-do. His grandparents founded the Oak Hill plantation, and they grew fruits and vegetables and things. And then his father's generation, his father and his brothers, realized that the clay under the dirt at Oak Hill was very, very well suited to brick making. And this, of course, was the mid-1800s when St. Louis was absolutely exploding in population, right? Because it was a major jumping off point for people going west. So building materials were in a lot of demand. They needed a lot of brick and stone and that sort of thing. So they formed the Parker Russell Mining and Brick Company, had a couple factories, that sort of thing. And that's the world that Charlie was born into. So his family, they were doing all right. They were just fine. He had a couple of brothers. And of course, if you are a well-to-do family with multiple businesses that you're involved in and you have multiple sons, what is the expectations in the 1800s? Those sons will each take a business, right? Yes, and the family name will continue on. Well, of course, Charlie Russell had a little bit of a different plan. From a young age, he showed a really great aptitude for artwork. He was always doodling. He was always stealing his sister's wax. Apparently at the time, a hobby for young girls was to have wax, and they would form it into pretty flowers and use it for some embroidery needs and things like that. Well, he was always stealing his sister's wax and sculpting little things out of it. Okay, and he continued that through his life. It was not uncommon for Charlie to have a little piece of clay or wax or something in his pocket, and maybe he'd be telling you a story. This is later in life. I fast-forwarded a little bit. Maybe he'd be telling you a story about something, and he's kind of fiddling with his pocket or down near his pockets. And when he's done telling the story, say it's a story about a bear, he would produce a little bear sculpture that he had created without looking, just down by his little side, down just like I'm doing right now. I know those in the podcast can't see me, but imagine. But what was really infuriating people is he would show this little bear that was the subject of the story, but then the minute you tried to get too close to it, Charlie would close his hand on it, because obviously it wasn't very detailed. But, and it would just, be returned to that little ball of wax or clay. So he started doing that from a pretty young age. He hated school. Absolutely hated school. Studying his letters and his writing now, we're very confident that he most likely suffered from a learning disability. He probably had dysgraphia. You all have heard of dyslexia, right? Dyslexia is where you have a trouble getting words and numbers from paper into your brain in the right order, okay? Dysgraphia is kind of the opposite of that. You get it all in there just fine, but when it comes time to put that back down onto paper, or in that time up on maybe a blackboard, it's very, very difficult. So the writing portion is hard for him. So we're pretty sure that's probably what Charlie's issue with school was. Of course, if you have a learning disability, I could see your reflection in this window, and it seemed like someone was trying to walk out the door. Sorry, I got distracted. So yes, I'm a squirrel chaser. It's a problem. So if back then, if you had a learning disability, teachers didn't necessarily know how to recognize that or even help you. Now there's lots of tools, right? It's pretty common. But back then you were just labeled as the bad kid who never pays attention, takes way too long to do his work, and he was always getting in trouble. So he would often cut school. He'd hide his books, go down to the river, Missouri River there, and watch the boats coming and going, talking to people coming and going. And that combined with the books he read and that were read to him as a child, and the stories he heard from his maternal grandmother, Lucy Bent. Lucy Bent was the sister of Charles and William Bent. Have anybody heard of Charles and William Bent? You have to be a pretty deep history buff to know those names. So Charles and William Bent established Bent's Fort, which is in current-day eastern Colorado. It was the first trading post that was established west of the Mississippi. Okay, so it was a really important trading post at that time. And they had illustrious careers. One of them went on to, I believe, become a provisional governor of like New Mexico or something. He ended up being scalped and killed because the Native Americans in the area were not pleased about having a new governor. although he had married a Native American woman. So Charlie is growing up hearing these stories of his great uncles and forming this vision of the West and what the West must be like. And he desperately wanted to see it because he also was aware that the West was changing. The railroad was expanding. Native American people were being moved to reservations. Okay, so all of these things were happening around him, and he just so desperately wanted to come west and see it. So finally, at the age of 16, his parents relented and were like, okay, dude, fine. If you have to go, go. And in the back of their mind, they were kind of like, dude, you're a 16-year-old. They probably didn't say dude. Charlie, you're a 16-year-old young man who has grown up with cooks and cleaners and nannies and someone to press your shirts. Are you really going to go west and live the hard life? Like, probably not. You're going to be back within the month. Well, Charlie got on a train. He got up to Montana through a series of train rides, and then he took a stagecoach to Helena, and then he bought a horse and wagon with another man, and they came out to the Utica area. Are you all familiar with Utica? It's kind of between Great Falls and Lewistown-ish, east of Great Falls. He settled in Utica, and he'd gotten a job before he came out as a sheep herder. I assume none of you own sheep. Okay?
I have.
You have. Are sheep very exciting little critters?
They can be.
They can be. Are they very smart?
Not really.
Not really, no. Sheep are followers, right?
Definitely.
Yes, if you have one sheep walking, the other one's probably going to follow, even if that means they fall into a coulee. Or fall off a cliff, okay? Sheep are not the most intelligent critters. Well, Charlie Russell, I promise we're going to look at some artwork today. I promise. I can see it on all your faces. You're like, what is this lady ever going to stop talking? I promise. So Charlie has always wanted to go west and have adventure and be a cowboy and meet the Native Americans, and all of a sudden he is watching sheep. It's not very exciting. It's not what he had in mind. So he lasts a couple days. Literally a couple days, and gets fired because he loses the sheep. And he's just sitting there by a creek by himself, and a man named Jake Hoover walks up. Jake Hoover's a mountain man. He was a market hunter, so he survived hunting. And he walks up to Charlie, and he goes, hey, kid, what are you doing? Have any of you ever talked to a 16-year-old boy? What are you doing? Nothing. Where's your food? Don't have any. Where's your outfit? Where's your people? Don't have one. Okay. So Jake, thankfully, takes Charlie under his wing, says, come with me, I'll teach you kind of how to survive. Charlie becomes sort of his apprentice, if you will. And I like to bring that up because it's, Charlie spends around 2 years with Jake. Records aren't real good for this, but around 2 years with Jake. And he popped home to St. Louis a couple times during that time. But generally, he worked with Jake for about 2 years, and in that time, he was Jake's apprentice, meaning he helped dress the animals. Now, here's a funny story about me. I'm not from Montana. I'm from Seattle. My husband is from Montana. And when I first moved here, someone said they dressed an animal in terms of hunting, and I was like, oh, did you like put your coat on it or your hat? Like, I don't understand. Okay, so for those who may not be aware, dressing an animal means you take it apart. Yes? You cut it. Everyone's looking at me like, yes, lady, we know. It's for the podcast people. So you take it apart. And that's really important because as an artist, you need to know the form of things, right? You need to know the muscles. You need to know the bones. You need to be able to touch and feel the fur. How could you possibly draw an elk and show its fur reflecting the sunlight if you've never really touched an elk and seen that in real life, okay? So this is a really important piece of Charlie's education. I keep seeing that reflection. And he never went to art school. So this kind of becomes his learning center because he's just sort of Jake's apprentice and he's drawing and painting on the side, okay? So I'm gonna pause there. Let's go look at a picture of an elk since I just talked about one. So he spends about 2 years with Jake. And in that time, he's really working on studying the animals and kind of seeing how they look, what their fur texture is like, what their body type is like. And you see that continued through his artwork. Now, it wasn't until 1864, he moves to Montana in 1880. He works with Jake for a couple of years. And then he becomes a professional cowboy. That's a little bit of a lie. We call him America's cowboy artist, but he wasn't actually a cowboy. He was the night wrangler. It was his job to stay up all night and make sure the horses stayed close. Okay, so as the night wrangler, he got to work with the cowboys though, and it was actually the perfect job for him because he worked all night, and then during the daytime, of course, he would sleep a little bit, but he would also be able to watch the cowboys working, and we see that later in his artwork. We say he's America's cowboy artist because he actually lived the life of a cowboy. He was out on these weeks-long cattle drives. He watched the cowboys working. He knew how horses and cattle interacted with one another. I joke often that Frederick Remington is someday going to haunt me because I pick on him a lot. So Remington, another very famous Western artist, actually lived on the East Coast. And he would come west and study things and watch things and see things, but then he would go home, okay? When I give tours to particularly farmers and ranchers, specifically ranchers, they say that one of the reasons they love Charlie Russell, that Charlie Russell is so beloved, particularly in the state of Montana, is because he knew the job. He knew what it was to be a cowboy, and his saddles always look right. He's always got the right knots tied in his ropes. He has the cowboy leaning in the right direction. You know, all of those little details that to someone like me, a city slicker, I wouldn't pick up on if that's wrong. But if you're a rancher, if that's your life, you're not going to be able to enjoy the painting because you're looking at it and you're like, man, that's wrong. The cowboy would never be seated back in his saddle when the horse is climbing up a hill. He'd be forward. You know, Charlie knows those little details. And that's one of the reasons he's so beloved. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about this painting. This painting is called The Exalted Ruler. Beautiful picture. The Rocky Mountains are in the background. We have a river up on the side here. Probably the Missouri River, although it could be the Sun River. And then we have the elk sort of in the foothills. There's a herd of elk. One in particular is in the front. Now, let me tell you a little story. Another one. Charlie Russell was a member of the Elks Club in town. Do you guys know the Elks Club? Are you familiar with it? It's a fraternal organization. He painted this for them. It's titled To My Brothers. He painted it in about 1912. Probably started it a little bit earlier than that. It was a commission. They asked him to paint it. We don't know if they paid Charlie for it or not. We don't think they did. We think he just gave it to him. This hung in the Elks Lodge for many, many years. And it's called the Exalted Ruler because you have this large elk here in the center of the painting. So in an elk club, they have an elected president, if you will, but they don't call it the president. Fraternal organizations in that era, when they were starting, they all picked really bizarre names. Are any of you members of a fraternal organization? No? They have crazy names for their elected leaders. So their elected leader is the Exalted Ruler. Okay, so their club president is the Exalted Ruler. What Charlie's doing is he's showing the club as a herd. So you've got the Exalted Ruler, or the bull elk, the biggest, strongest elk, kind of in the center of the painting. And then you've got the rest of the members of the club behind him. Okay? And you have the next club president over here on the right, a little downhill from him, sort of watching what's going on, not posing he's not like paw on the ground and ready to stampede. And then you have the outgoing president, the last Exalted Ruler. He's walking down the hill, but he's still there. He's still in the picture. He's still a trusted advisor. And he is there, but his term is over. He's exiting the building. Okay? So that's the story behind the Exalted Ruler. On its surface, most people just think it's a nice picture of an elk herd. But really, there's a deeper meaning there for the Elks Club. It represents their leadership structure. One of the things that Charlie likes to do in his paintings, because many of them have kind of a deeper meaning than what you just see on the surface, he likes to make people look at everything in the picture. And one of the ways he guarantees that, or he encourages people to do that, is he'll hide things. So there's a hidden bird in this painting. It's a grouse, a sage grouse. For those of you from Montana, know what those look like. There's a little sage grouse. Does anybody see it? Yes, it's kind of center of the picture, low. You see it's the wings on the spots on its wings, okay? So he hides often animals in his paintings because he wants his audience to look at the entire painting.
Now the picture of the Exalted Ruler is about 5 foot by 5 foot. It is a big picture and a lot of detail.
It's a large painting, yes, absolutely.
Very large painting.
It has a beautiful, what we refer to as one of Charlie's Montana skies. He became known for his Montana skies, his sunsets, sunrises. In fact, there's a great song by Ian Tyson called The Gift, and it's about Charlie Russell, and there's a line in it that says when Charlie, I'm paraphrasing here, but when Charlie died and went up to heaven, God told Charlie, well, you'll take care of the sunrises and sunsets in good old Montana because you can do them better than I can. So, it's a little tidbit. I meant to ask, I always ask my tour groups, is there a painting that any of you are aware, like know of, or have always wanted to see, or when you've been here before, it's one of your favorites? Is there a painting you want to make sure that we look at?
I like the chuck wagon, the blow up in the chuck wagon when the horse is rearing up.
Yep.
And I also really like the wolf over here.
Lone wolf. Okay.
Wolf is.
Yep. Any other?
Did you guys already talk about the Kootenai camp? How that's?
I haven't yet, but I certainly can. This one? Yeah. So the room we're standing in right now, we call it just Gallery 6 here in the museum. This is one of our rotating galleries. The artwork that's on the walls right now doesn't actually belong to the C.M. Russell Museum. It is all on loan from the Montana Historical Society. It normally lives in Helena, so about 70 miles down the road from us. They're building a new museum, which is very, very exciting for them, and also very cool for us, because while they're under construction, they have loaned us some of their best Russells, including a collection called the McKay Collection. The McKay is a collection that was assembled by a man named Malcolm McKay. This is not one of those paintings, but those are the other ones we'll look at in a minute. This one, I'm so glad you asked about it, is very, very unique because it's actually unfinished. It was on the easel when Charlie Russell died. So it has just sort of been assigned the name of Kootenai Camp on Swan Lake because when a painting is unfinished, obviously the artist has not given it a name yet. And so typically it's just named with whatever is in the painting. So I really enjoy this painting because you really get to see Charlie's process, which is kind of rare especially for deceased artists, obviously. You can't watch them paint. And for those of you who are not oil painters, which there aren't many of those on an average tour, you get to see how you have to build an oil painting. For you guys as engineers, oil paintings is kind of like building a building. You have to have your foundation. You have to have your canvas, right? You are engineers, I know that. But in a variety of types of engineers?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was like, oh gosh, am I talking to like mechanical engineers that care nothing about buildings?
And here I was thinking there was a bunch of trained people.
Okay,
Sorry.
Well, you have to have your canvas, and then you build color on top of itself. And so Charlie will often start with the background. You can see he's got the mountains, the clouds, he has the trees in the background, and he's starting to build the trees in the foreground. Little art language. So the background is obviously the back of the painting. The foreground is whatever appears closest to you in the painting. I assume everyone's knowledge level of paintings is like 0. So please don't be offended when I explain things like that. So the foreground is where we start to see him starting to build. So are any of you familiar with Bob Ross, the painter Bob Ross?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you know how he puts the tree trunks in? And then he gets his big fan brush and adds in the happy little branches and happy little leaves? Okay. I'm not necessarily comparing Charlie Russell and Bob Ross to clarify. However, Bob's not wrong. Okay. So you put the tree trunk in first, and then you start building off of that tree trunk. You start adding in your branches. And that's exactly what Charlie's doing here. He's adding in some of the texture of the underlayers of the tree foliage, if you will. And you can see he's also doing that back here. This is probably a fall scene, I would assume, based on some of the colors he's using. And he's got the trees turning from, green to sort of an orange. Maybe these are tamaracs. Over in the Swan Lake area, those of you from Montana, Swan Lake is a real place, right? It's over near Seeley Lake, kind of between Missoula and Kalispell Whitefish-ish, Flathead Lake. So this is Kootenai Camp. The Kootenai was a Native American tribe, right? Most people know them today as the Salish Kootenai, a confederated tribe. But this is a depiction of one of their camps. So he's put in the trees. He's got, 6 teepees here. Perhaps this could be a smaller teepee. I've had people ask me if they are a sweat lodge. I am not familiar enough with Kootenai culture to know if they practice sweat lodges, but it sounds plausible, especially because it's right here next to a fire. What I think is really cool is he has the lake here, and then you can see he's started to build maybe a canoe. Do you see the outlines, the beginnings of what could eventually be a canoe there? And possibly a person. You see the person there? They're sort of reaching down into the water. You can see their head pretty clearly and an arm reaching down, okay? Did you have anything
No, that's what I wondered.
about? Yeah, yep. So it is an unfinished painting. Like I said, it was on his easel when he died. We think he probably actually started this painting in 1925. He died in October of 1926. So that also gives you a little idea as to how long sometimes he would take to create a painting. Charlie is like many artists. He would put a painting on his easel. Now, oils are difficult because you have to paint and then you have to wait and let it dry before you can add on top of it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a gross, muddy brown mess, right? But also, he would work on a painting for a while and then maybe get distracted or lose interest, or maybe Nancy would sell a commission, his wife Nancy. She was his business manager. I argue that if it weren't for Nancy, we may not know who Charlie Russell was today, because she's the one who really took his career to the next level, if you will, and made him an international name. But maybe Nancy sold a commission that was on a timeline to possibly Malcolm McKay, and this painting had to take a back seat to those. All right? Okay. We'll kind of walk around. I don't think I quite have time to talk about Lathkill's Lonesome. Gosh, we only have 10 more minutes. But Lathkill's Lonesome is a pretty famous painting. It's a nocturne. So nocturnes are paintings that depict a scene at night. They're kind of tricky to paint, as you would imagine. Charlie Russell was pretty good at them because he's so good with using light and shadow. But that's a pretty famous nocturne. I really like to talk about the Roundup. So these paintings are all part of that McKay collection that I was talking about. So Malcolm McKay was from New Jersey. His family was also quite wealthy. His father was a financier on Wall Street. And Malcolm lived most of his life there. And then in his early 20s, he decided to come west before he really buckled down, joined the family business, to just sort of have a couple years of fun. And he really fell in love with Montana, so much so that he bought a share of a ranch. It's down near present-day Red Lodge. And you can actually go there today. The McKay family still runs it, and they have a little bit of a guest lodge or guest ranch area. So that's pretty cool. It's called the Lazy E L Ranch. Bob, you breaking into my tour again? That's okay. Just passing through. I'm going to talk about this one, and then I'll take them in next door. So Malcolm, this is a commission that Malcolm gave to Charlie. He asked Charlie to paint this particular scene. He wanted a roundup. Now, roundups, when Charlie was a cowboy, occurred twice a year. When Charlie was cowboying, it was still the days of the open range, meaning we didn't have barbed wire fence ranches as we know today. We didn't have hay fields, that sort of thing. The cows were just sort of out. Then twice a year, the cowboys worked and did a big roundup in an area. They'd gather all the horses into a large group. And depending on the time of year, one of two things would happen. Either they would be sorted for shipment, depending on what the owner wanted to do, or they would be branded. What time of year do you think this is happening in?
Spring.
Springtime. Why do you think springtime?
Because the calves are small and easy to brand.
Yes, so it's a branding scene, and it's happening in springtime. So you've got the main grouping of cattle back here. I didn't give you guys the rules of the museum, which is please don't touch the paintings. And the reason we don't touch paintings is because they can become damaged. You see that little piece of damage right there? Okay, it's where the paint got chipped off. I figured I don't have to tell the adults don't touch the paintings. So you have the main group of cattle back here, and then they section them off into smaller groups, often by brand, the mark on the animal. And then cowboys will work in groups. They'll rope a calf. So this guy's he's just roped the back legs of this calf, cinch the rope and pull him over where you have the branding team working by a fire. They brand the calf, and then they release it to run back and try to find its mama, okay? So this shows a complete branding scene. Charlie created it for Malcolm, sent it off to him. And when Malcolm received it, he said, gosh, this is lovely, but you know what would make it better? If my brand was on one of those cows. Well, Charlie never accepted change orders. Do you guys love change orders? No, you probably don't have to deal much with change orders. Never mind. I tried to make a construction joke. It fell flat. Charlie never would make changes on his paintings. He painted things the way he wanted to paint them and did not accept changes. However, in this case, he and Malcolm had become such good friends that Malcolm sent the painting back with a letter to Nancy, because everything went through Nancy, saying, Malcolm loves the painting. I love the painting, but I'd like Charlie to add my brand. So Charlie did that. So on this cow right here, right by the shadow of my finger, you can see there's an E, a lazy E, so it means a capital E that's lazy, so it's laying on its back. And then there's an L that comes out from the bottom of it. You see that? Okay, so the lazy E-L. Perfect. All right, I have time for one more painting. We can see, should we go in back in here and we'll look at Death of a Gambler maybe? That's a good one. There's a ghost in Death of a Gambler. Is that enough of a teaser?
What's the typical value of a painting?
It depends on medium and size, and then the year it was painted. But recently we had an auction. The museum has a fundraising auction where we sell consigned artwork, so no artwork that belongs to our museum. And a Russell sold for $1.2 million. But I've seen Russells sell for as much as $4 in recent history. But yep, they get up there.
And how many of the paintings in here are actually originals versus prints?
In our museum galleries, we only display originals unless we're displaying a print as a reference, and we always very clearly mark it as a print. It usually is unframed because we want it to be really, really clear that it is not the real thing. So in our museum, everything is an original.
And is that Charlie Russell's saddle over here?
Yes. Yep, we have his saddle on display. We also have his hat, his boots. He was well known for wearing, it's called a métis sash. If you've ever seen there aren't many color photographs of Charlie Russell, as you can imagine, but a self-portrait of Charlie, he wears a red woven sash around his waist. Those are called métis sashes. The Métis are a mixed race people, generally out of Canada, and they are known for these woven sashes that they create. And Charlie took to wearing one as his belt. That was sort of his style. So we have one of those on display as well. All right, group, we can do shoes. Do we want to talk about Death of a Gambler, this painting on the left here, or Whose Meat, the one on the right? What do we think? Death of a Gambler, sold. So Charlie is pretty well known for his what we call predicament paintings. They're storytelling paintings. Many of Charlie's paintings aren't necessarily storytelling. They're of wildlife and landscapes and things like that. But the majority, I would say, are these predicament paintings, meaning they're showing a snapshot in time. So Death of a Gambler shows a scene. It's a street scene, probably in Utica, the town, I shouldn't call it a city, the town of Utica, back in the mid to late 1800s. And there are some gentlemen who look to have walked out of a saloon, and they've gotten themselves into a gunfight. Now, do you remember back at the Exalted Ruler, I told you that Charlie would hide things in his paintings because he wants you to look at the entire painting. There is something hidden. I'm not going to tell you what it is right now, but the reason he does that is because he tells stories in his paintings, and he wants you to look at the entire painting and start picking up all the little clues as to what the story is. So here's the participation part of the tour. What are some of the clues as to the story in this painting that you see?
I see some cards scattered around the ground.
Yes, good eye. There are playing cards on the ground. Another clue can be the title of the painting. One of the titles, this painting has two titles. It's complicated. I won't get into that. But one of the titles is Death of a Gambler. We have Death of a Gambler. We have playing cards on the ground. We've got some guys shooting. Okay. So now we're maybe starting to form the story in our head, right? Perhaps Charlie created this painting, and he did not leave us a written record of exactly what is happening. But perhaps 2 gentlemen were in the saloon where there's a clearly marked licensed gambling sign out front, and they're playing cards. And a 3rd guy walks in and asks to join the game, and he sits down and starts playing, and then he starts dealing aces out of his sleeve to himself. That would set off a gunfight, wouldn't it, in those days? Okay, so maybe you've got someone who's cheating at cards. Maybe you've got a sore loser. Maybe you've got a sore winner. There are a lot of reasons why these 3 gentlemen, one who is standing behind the hitching post, and he seems to be the one that the other 2 were after, right? It's kind of a 1 versus 2 situation. However, he's the last man standing, almost literally. Because you've got one guy who's on the ground. He's not having a good day, right? Is this guy having a good day? No, it looks like he's barely got one last shot off. And unfortunately, well, or fortunately, his shot has hit the hitching post. Do you see these little bursts of wood chips coming off? That detail that Charlie's added? Okay. So it's your job as the viewer in Charlie Russell's paintings, not just this one, to actually stand there and look at all the clues that Charlie is giving you, and then start telling the story in your mind. I was a terrible museum visitor before I started working here, because I would walk in front of a painting and be like, nice horse, cool bear. Okay, I would just kind of pick a thing in the painting and keep walking. But you're not supposed to do that, especially with Charlie Russell paintings, because again, they're telling stories. So you're supposed to actually stop and look at all the little details, the bottles on the ground, the playing cards, the knocked over chair, and then start telling that story. Because Charlie was an artist, yes, but I think first and foremost, Charlie was actually a storyteller. He wrote a couple books telling stories, or waving yarns, or weaving yarns, as Charlie used to say, not waving, weaving. So I just want to always drive that home to people. If you are at a museum, particularly if you see a Charlie Russell painting, just be sure to stop and look at it and look at all the details, and then start telling yourself what that story is. Okay? Now, I promised you a hidden object. This one is the only one that I know in Charlie's collection, Charlie's lifetime works, that is a human that is a hidden object. It's actually not a human, it's a ghost. Okay? So, do you all see this square window right here on the store? If you look right below that black square window, you can kind of see a black hat. It looks like they're standing sort of this way, looking down to their right. Do you see that figure? Uh-huh. Right there? I am way closer to this painting than I should be. But, do you see it? Okay. So, it's clearly a ghost. Like, it's clearly, your eyes are not just playing tricks on you. Like, that's the outline of a human. Now, you saw in Kootenai Camp on Swan Lake how Charlie, when he would be composing a painting or just starting it, he sort of blocks out where he's going to put people. So there's 2 possible explanations for this ghost. One is exactly that. Charlie had started to block out a person right there. And he changed his mind. Maybe when he first started composing, this horse was not supposed to be rearing up like this. The horse was going to be more flat, and he was going to have more people back here. And then he realized, you know, if there's a gunfight happening right here, that horse is going to react. So if that horse is reacting, I want to give it space. I'm going to paint out this other guy that I've already put in. Maybe that's one possible solution. And he just didn't do a very good job of painting. Or sometimes paint can actually settle over time. I don't know if you've ever seen headlines of like, hidden Da Vinci painting found behind other painting. Sometimes the way they can see that is actually that painting can start to sort of come to the surface. Okay? That's one possibility. I don't believe that. That's not my preferred explanation. I actually really do think Charlie put him in as a ghost, and he intended to make it a ghostly figure. And I actually think, and again, this is purely my opinion, I think that it's this man standing here in the doorway who has been shot and is sort of dying. Because the ghost has a black hat. He has a black hat. It's just been knocked off. It looks to me like the ghost is wearing a white shirt with a black vest. White shirt, black vest. Okay, so I wonder if maybe it's this guy's ghost. But that's all up to you to decide. All right. It's 2:32. I went 2 minutes over. I'm sorry. I hope you all and I'm going to stick with my podcast friends.
Okay.
But I hope you guys will come back to the museum at some point. I literally scratched the surface. I'm sorry I took so much time giving you Charlie's history, but I think that kind of helps you appreciate Charlie's artwork a little bit more, to know that he lived here, worked here, knew a lot of the details and things. But we also have Charlie's house and studio on site that you could see next time when you come. Is there anything that you knew about before the museum, before you got here, that you definitely wanted to see?
Well, there was a book I read, I think it was called From the Pecos to the Mussel Shell, and it was a document of a cowboy that came up from Texas and brought with the big cattle drives.
Yep.
And he ended up on the range with Charlie Russell, and he had a lot of really interesting things, but he was talking about buffalo hides that he used to paint on and then would hand out to different Indians. They would bring the buffalo hides to him. Do you have anything like that on display? Have you heard much about those?
I have heard that they existed. Buffalo hides, as you can imagine, especially back then, not being what today we would consider professionally tanned.
Right.
Didn't hold up real well.
Okay.
So I don't know of any that have survived. There may be. We don't have any in our museum of actual buffalo hides that he painted on. We do have, of course it's not on display right this minute, we have a safe door.
Oh,
and I
really?
think this speaks to Charlie early in his career, his willingness to paint on literally anything that someone would pay him to paint on. And so there's an old safe door that would be in, it wasn't like a bank safe, it's smaller. It's, 2 feet tall by 12 inches wide, 10 inches wide. But that's kind of a cool piece. I do have a painting over here, it's called The Kindergarten, that shows a traditional Native American painting on a bison hide, and maybe similar to what Charlie might have done.
Okay, and as we're walking around here, you've got so many pictures that, like you said, describe cowboy life as it was in the late 1800s. I'm sure that most people know who he is as far as an artist because he is so famous, but living in Wyoming, living in Montana, as you see these pictures, you can just visualize so very clearly what was going on at those times.
Yes.
And it's just such an amazing documentation of the time and of the lifestyle.
Yes, yep. So in fact, we're standing in front of a painting right now that's called the Mussel Shell Roundup, speaking of the Mesa to the Mussel Shell.
Pecos.
Excuse me, yes,
That's okay.
Pecos to the Mussel Shell.
That's in Texas, Pecos.
Yes. I'm from Seattle. My favorite barbecue restaurant in Seattle was called Pecos Pit.
Oh,
Not
okay,
that has any connection. But so yes, this is one of the roundups that he worked on. And it was near the Mussel Shell River, which is a river here in Montana. And you can see beautiful buttes in the background. I mentioned previously about Charlie Russell's use of color in his depiction of the Montana sky. One of the things Charlie will often do is reflect a sunrise or a sunset off some buttes or off the mountains. So if you look at the wall of paintings we're looking at, there's actually, of the 5 paintings, 3 of them show the sky is kind of a blue color still, but you can see the pinks and the oranges and the purples of a sunrise or a sunset reflected on these buttes or mountains, if you will, depending on the painting we're looking at.
And this picture's really cool from the standpoint of you got a cowboy coming off of his horse to the right-hand side as we're looking at it, and his saddle is attached around the horn to a cow.
Yes.
And the saddle is coming off the left-hand side because of the amount of pressure that horse is or the cow is pulling.
Yes.
Like his cinch isn't quite tight enough to take the horse with him.
Well, this maybe this is a scene that Charlie had seen in his own life. You never know, but he maybe saw it happening. So what it's showing is there's 2 cowboys. One cowboy in particular has roped a cow, and it's just slightly downhill from the cowboy. And the cowboy did what cowboys so often do, is he was able to throw his lasso, rope the cow, and then he wound the rope around the saddle horn of his saddle. But what's happened is another cow has decided to intervene.
And come across the rope.
And so the cow is coming across the rope, gotten its leg tangled. Now this cowboy's and the horse, to be honest, are in a bit of a situation, right? They're in a predicament, using that word I used before. He's got a predicament here because the cowboy is going one direction. He and the horse were headed to what? The left, their left.
Right.
And that cow, and now the other one that's tangled in the line, was headed to the right, and the saddle's being pulled one way. So this cowboy needs to make a decision. Is he going to try to release his rope? Sometimes they would carry a knife. Does he cut his rope? Which, they're out in the middle of nowhere. If he cuts his rope, he's going to have a hard time doing his job for the next few days or weeks.
Exactly.
And so this cowboy's in a predicament. What is he going to do? Is his partner behind him going to come in and try to rope one of these cows to help the situation? Unfortunately, he's pointed in the wrong direction, and to be honest, he and his horse have gone into a bush.
And they're laughing.
And he does look like he's a little entertained, yes.
He's going down.
Yep. But it's kind of a serious situation because, you know, this cowboy, he could jump off the horse, but his horse is now attached to these cattle. And what's that horse going to do? Is his horse going to become injured?
Right.
So,
well, then he's in a real bind because he's walking back to camp and probably walking tomorrow.
yes. Yep. So all of these exciting scenes that Charlie's kind of known for. Why don't we head back? We'll head back kind of
that
this way.
same book, just as a reference, was also saying that he had a photographic memory and he would be able to see these scenes playing out and then go right back to the exact same place in his mind and be able to put that on canvas. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but he said that the author of the book, and it was an old book, probably 1930s book.
I'm familiar. I can't come up with the name of the man who wrote the book, but I'm familiar
with the book.
Yes.
Okay.
I haven't read it myself, but I didn't know Charlie, so I can't speak to if he had a photographic memory, but I can say it's not uncommon for him to have painted the same scene multiple times. And he'll change some details, but we often wonder, is this a scene that he saw with his own eyes? A lot of cowboying scenes, we assume.
Right.
We'll go look at Bronc to Breakfast, which is the one you referenced a little bit ago.
That's one of my favorites.
We can head that way next. There's a couple scenes that are similar to that one. Or is it a scene that is from a story Charlie heard? So the painting we're standing in front of right now is more likely, cowboys at the end of the night, they sit around the campfire and they tell stories.
I'm sure.
And sometimes they're truthful, and sometimes the fish gets a little bigger every time it's told, right? Those old fishing stories. So this painting in particular is called Paying the Fiddler. It's a 1916 oil on canvas. It is kind of a predicament painting because when you walk up to it, what you first see is, again, in the background, you've got beautiful Montana landscape with a butte in the background. A lot of people wonder if this is out near Utica, Stanford Geyser area, for those of you familiar with Montana, because out there we have the Highwood Mountains, and then there is Square Butte, and just next to Square Butte, there's a little baby butte that's called Haystack Butte.
Okay.
And if you look in this picture, you can see a Square Butte, and then off to the left of it is Little Haystack Butte. So a lot of people wonder if maybe this is out in that direction. And in the foreground of the painting, there are 3 horses. One has a rider on it. One has a rider standing next to his horse holding the reins. And then there's a horse without a rider. And a rifle. Yep, that's an important piece. And then there's a horse without a rider. And attached to that horse's saddle horn, like we saw in the painting just now, there's a rope wrapped, and that rope is attached to a calf. Okay, and there's a fire there. And then laying kind of in a creek bed, a dry creek bed in the foreground, closest to us, there is a dead man.
I bet he was doing something with branding.
Probably. Now, why would that have cost him his life, though?
Because he's stealing somebody else's. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yes.
If you're branding cattle that aren't yours, you're stealing the cattle, and it's. From what I understand, it was kind of a death sentence back in the day.
Absolutely. Well, they couldn't just pick up the phone and call 911 and say someone stole our calf.
No.
No, the cowboys had the green light to handle the situation. So, like I said, this painting is called Paying the Fiddler. Again, Charlie giving us clues as to what the painting's about. And that calf being tied to that horse, that clearly belongs to the dead man, and a fire having been built right next to that calf. Those are all very clear clues that we are looking at a cattle rustler who has paid the fiddler. He's suffered the consequences of his actions. Now, cattle rustlers, if you're not familiar, is someone who steals cattle in general. Or you can also have horse rustlers, but mostly cattle rustlers. They steal calves. And then they would find somewhere to hide, usually behind a hillside. So on the left side of the painting here, there's a hill, and everything we're looking at in the foreground is in the shadow. Did you notice that? Charlie has us looking
Yeah.
at the subject of the painting in the shadow, but the light is clearly in the background, so we know we're hiding. This
Right.
guy was hiding. So they would find a spot to hide nearby, build a quick fire, and then they would brand that calf really quickly. Or sometimes if the calf had just been branded, they would change the brand.
They used rings.
Yep, they'd
and
use
they
little
would be able
rings
to-
or straight pieces. Yep, they would figure out a way to manipulate that brand, because if a calf has your brand on it, can anyone argue that it's not yours?
It's pretty hard.
Yeah, it's
'Cause
pretty hard.
They're permanent.
Yeah. Yep. So what most likely happened here was, yes, this guy stole this calf, found somewhere to hide, built his little fire, was about to brand, but two cowboys that are working that cattle outfit maybe took the morning or the evening count. That's a tricky thing with Charlie's paintings. I always say sunrise or sunset because we
Right.
often don't know. Took a quick count and realized, wait a minute, we're missing a calf. And so they would look around, see if there's any clues of maybe a predator. If they didn't see anything, then they might go and take a little look about. And they would know to watch for smoke. Notice that there's not a whole lot of smoke coming out of that fire.
Right.
Cattle rustlers were very, very well informed about what materials on the plains would make a smoky fire versus a smokeless fire.
Okay.
Fun fact, dried buffalo poo,
Right.
very smoky fires. Same with cattle dung,
Okay.
very smoky fires. Cattle rustlers would not want to build a fire on or with poo for the smoke reason. But anyway, so they probably saw the smoke from this fire or happened around this corner, caught the guy red-handed. Now he has, the cattle rustler has a firearm kind of laying across his body. And if you notice, are you familiar with firearms?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What?
He's got it half cocked.
He's got it. So was he going to go quietly?
It doesn't. No.
No,
It looks like there may have been a gunfight prior to him being shot.
Yep. I'm not going to make a self-defense claim or anything like that, but it looks like he was not just going to say, "Oh, yep, sorry, my bad. That is your calf, my mistake."
Yep.
He was ready to fight back. So these cowboys beat him to it, but. Anyway, so this is another, again, nice example of a predicament painting that Charlie was known for.
And then this one here has always been intriguing to me. The lone wolf, that just the whole look of it and the sky and the foreground and everything with it. It's just a lone wolf in probably a 3x4 frame that is just standing on kind of a knob, snarling.
It's a bone.
Oh, yeah, there is a bone there.
Yep, he's got his paw on a bone.
There you go. And
Yep.
he's snarling at whoever's coming up. He ain't going to give up easy.
Yes.
But it's just one of those really kind of cold, it has a cold feeling to it.
It does, yeah. He's lonely, if you will. Wolves.
Hungry?
Yep. Wolves were. They're, to this day, are kind of a polarizing critter.
Very much so.
And I wonder, Charlie would have known, working on those cattle outfits, a lot of the owners of the herds would actually pay cowboys a bounty
Right.
for killing wolves. And so a lot of cowboys would practice their skill, and it would kind of be a game for them to go out and sort of hunt the wolves. They would try to rope wolves.
I was going to say,
we have a couple paintings called
Yep.
Roping a Wolf.
Yep.
I don't know, I almost wonder if Charlie had a little soft spot for wolves, because he very much respected the natural world and saw the white man's incursion, if you will, into that world. He very much respected the Native American people and the way they lived and their respect for animals and nature. And I wonder if Charlie felt a little bit badly for wolves because of what he saw happening to them for no other purpose than being wolves. And it's not their fault that cattle were brought to Montana.
Right. Well, they have the same issues with bears and other things too, other than they did mostly eradicate the wolves. And I guess we don't really need to get into the whole modern wolf controversy because it's very controversial as to whether wolves were really eradicated or not, and whether reintroduction was a good thing or a bad thing, and whether it hurt the native wolves that were trying to recover. Anyway,
Yeah,
Lauren's going to leave this one
out
alone.
of my wheelhouse. Well, and it's truly out of my wheelhouse. But I can tell you with this painting, a lot of the school children who come to the museum really love this painting. I think they're drawn to the fact that the wolf appears to be looking straight at you. And what's really interesting, though, and I point out to the students, is the way Charlie painted his eyes. If you move side to side, it actually looks like the wolf is following you. Which is pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. That's way cool.
Isn't that?
His head almost moves along with his eyes.
Yes, it's a little bit spooky. All right, let's go take a look at Bronx to Breakfast. I may encourage you to go out to the house in the studio.
Okay.
They're very interesting parts of our museum. It's always so fascinating to see where an artist worked and lived. So that painting is actually not a Russell.
Look different.
Yes, it does. It clearly looks different. Yes, so this is a painting that's on loan to us. It's an Albert Bierstadt. Bierstadt was born in Germany, but he painted in a similar time. He was about 20, 30 years older than Charlie, 15 years older than Charlie. This painting was actually painted the year Charlie was born, 1864. But he was professionally trained. He went to, the Dusseldorf Academy, studied fine art, studied with the European masters. And I appreciate that we have this on display because it really gives you a counterpoint to Russell's artwork, if you will. I can't remember if I've said this yet or not, but Charlie was never professionally trained. He did not go to art school.
But this one here looks very... what do I want to say? Picturesque versus.
It looks like a photograph.
It looks like a photograph.
Yes.
It's not like one of these ones that draws you into it the same way as.
Yes. So I am not a fine art major. I don't know all of the correct terminology, but what I like to say is, you can tell a professionally trained artist because their artwork is often very tight. It's clean. It's crisp. And Charlie's artwork is not that.
No.
In fact, I compare Charlie to Remington often. And Remington, technically, a lot of people say is a better artist. But a lot of people say Charlie captures the soul of the West.
There's a feeling. It
draws you in. It tells a story. The people and the animals have character. And so
I would definitely agree with that.
I like that we have this on display. Now, they are not artistically all that similar of an artist, Bierstadt and Russell, but it's nice to see kind of a counterpoint, another artist who was working in his era, but it definitely has a different style.
Right. Yeah, I don't feel that Remington brings you into the picture the way that the Russells do.
Well, I pick on Remington plenty, but... So I do like to show people this painting before I show Bronx to Breakfast. So Bronx to Breakfast is a very well-known watercolor. This is an oil. It was painted in 1915. Bronx to Breakfast is right around the corner. But this is an oil that was painted in 1915. What is the title of this painting?
When horses talk war, there's slim chance for truce.
Okay. Now, what are you seeing in this?
What am I seeing? I'm seeing probably 20 cowboys, 15 cowboys, all standing around a chuck wagon. The fire's going, so the chuck must be, actually several of them are eating, so they must just be coming back into camp, is what I would be assuming. You've got your chuck wagon and you've also got your supply wagon in front, which is interesting because you don't usually see that in a lot of pictures. And then you've got a cowboy with his horse standing right next to a great big mud pit.
Okay, now the horse and the cowboy, thinking about the title, what is the relationship between this horse and cowboy? What's going on between them right now?
He's probably got himself a bronc that he's trying to get straightened out before he heads out.
Yeah, that horse, okay, now forgive me for this, but I have a 3-year-old child.
Okay.
And that horse looks like my 3-year-old when I say it is time to go, please put your shoes on. Right? Uh-huh. Is that horse given that sort of like,
Sticking his tongue out.
His tongue's out.
Doesn't it just look like a toddler who has planted their feet and crossed their arms?
He does in a way, but horses usually, when they're about ready to blow up or whatever, have their ears back. But his tail's tucked pretty good, and he's sitting back.
Yeah. So when horses talk war, there's slim chance for truce. Okay, so I want you to remember this scene. Fun fact.
Okay.
That's Charlie Russell right there. He's put himself in the painting.
Okay,
Do you
right
see
next
his
to
hat?
the right next to
and
the
you
chuck
see his
wagon
red sash there, and he's wearing a yellow rain slicker.
Yep.
Okay.
Right next to the cookie.
I wonder if maybe, so since Charlie's standing there, and it's clearly sunrise or sunset, I'm wondering if maybe we're looking at sunrise.
I think you are.
And maybe the cowboys are just getting up, they're putting their bedrolls away, they're getting their horses saddled, okay?
Yep.
They're putting maybe they've just eaten their breakfast, so they're putting their plates into their saddlebags, okay? Okay, keep this scene in mind.
With the name of the title, that definitely fits morning a whole lot better. Now, see, this one here I used to have in a small print hanging on my bedroom wall.
This is one of my favorites,
up.
not technically speaking, because it's a pretty early Russell, so it's not one of his better ones, but I love the title.
The Indians discovering Lewis and Clark, and it shows...
Is that how we are typically taught that scene? Indians discovering Lewis and Clark?
No, I thought Lewis and Clark discovered the Indians.
Yes, yes. So that really nicely speaks to sort of Charlie's opinion and attitude towards the Native Americans, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. And the Native Americans are overlooking off of a bluff and see the boats coming up the Missouri River as they're headed.
The Native Americans are literally front and center. Lewis and Clark are in the background, removed, quite a bit smaller. And the Native Americans are discovering them, not the other way around. I just think that's an interesting sort of, for someone of his era,
right,
to kind of recognize, wait a minute, sometimes we get things a little backwards, possibly. Okay, so here's Bronc to breakfast.
It's not the same horse, but it's possibly the same scene.
So do you remember I told you that Charlie's alleged photographic memory?
Right.
But he often paints the same scene, or sometimes he'll paint different parts of a similar scene, probably something he's seen in the past. So that one was an oil painting from 1915.
Okay.
This is a watercolor 1908. Okay, so they're 7 years apart. So it's not like he sat down to create a set.
Right.
However, if you kind of think about it, that seems to me maybe a precursor almost, because here's Charlie.
Right.
Here's that yellow rain slicker. Okay, so he's got some similar elements, which makes me wonder if, yes, that is accurate. Maybe he did have a photographic memory, and he remembers these scenes and these situations, these stories he's seen with his own eyes, and he just paints different pieces of them at different times in his career. Okay.
But this one here's the precursor. So he's got
this is the aftermath. But this was painted first.
This was painted in 1908, and the other one was 1916, right?
1915, I think.
1915,
Yep.
okay.
But this is the aftermath of when horses talk war.
Right.
If you insist on riding them after your horses talked war, you're going to find yourself on a bucking bronco that has just ruined everyone's breakfast.
And and I'm sure there's some cowboys that aren't real happy.
No, although I think it's funny because look, Charlie and his friend over here, this guy, they've got their plates. They're sitting kind of on the right-hand side of the picture, and they're laughing. They're having a good giggle about that because they know that this guy and this horse are not going to be the favorites of these guys because they may not be getting breakfast now.
Or even these guys that just spilled their food that are sitting off to the side that are going to get trampled.
And then look at our camp.
Cookie's not happy either. He's
What's
got
he
his
holding?
knife out, and he's ready to take care of things. Yeah, that's just such a descriptive picture. One guy climbing up on the wheels to get out of the way.
Yeah, but he's kind of laughing about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So.
It's just his paintings are just so descriptive of what was going on in the time.
Yep. So.
Totally fascinating. This is a wonderful museum, and
thank you.
And I wish I could even begin to do.
One more quick story about this one, if you'll indulge me.
Yes.
So this painting is called Indian Hunter's Return. This is, again, all of these paintings were owned, in this room. So When Horses Talk War and then Bronc to Breakfast, this one, these all belong to Malcolm McKay. They're part of the Montana Historical Society. And we're so lucky to have them. I believe we'll have them till the end of this summer.
Okay.
So till, August of 2024 or so. This is a beautiful picture. It's a winter scene. So there's snow on the ground, and it's Indian Hunter's Return. It's 1900, oil on canvas. And it's showing probably a group of blood Indians, blood Native Americans. They lived primarily in Canada. Charlie spent some time with the blood Indians. He rode with a friend. There's a great story about it in this book. He rode with a friend up across the Canadian border because the friend needed to get out of town. So he rode with a friend up, and they kind of got stuck, or we're not sure exactly what happened, but Charlie ended up spending anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, depending on who you believe, up in a cabin right near the Blood Indian camp.
Okay.
There's rumors at the time, that Charlie had maybe struck up a romance with a woman. Maybe he was going to marry a Native American woman. You know, we don't know the truth to all of this, but that's the lore. But anyway, so this scene is depicting a group of hunters returning. And you can see sort of the main hunter. People are coming out of their teepees. You have a tribal elder greeting them, and they've got a bison, at least one bison, and you can see the meat, the flanks of the meat,
right,
on a saddle of a pack horse, and then the skin, the hide. Excuse me, the hide is laid down, and there's a camp dog licking the blood off the hide. Now, this painting hung in Malcolm McKay's home in New Jersey, where they didn't see a lot of Native Americans. And they definitely didn't see bloody bison hides.
Right.
And guests of the McKays would say, like, that's a beautiful painting, but that's kind of gross. Why do we need to see that? Well, word of those comments got back to Charlie, and Charlie responded with, well, that's the way it was, and I'm not going to change it.
Good for him.
So I think that really speaks to Charlie's desire to capture
accuracy,
the West, Native American culture, cowboy life, pick a thing, but to capture it accurately. Yes, he, I am not an expert in specific tribal cultures and things, but I can tell you I've been told by groups when I've taken them on tours, that Native American groups in particular, that they have noticed that in Charlie Russell's paintings, if he is depicting the Blackfeet people or the Blood people, he does a pretty good job of having the correct types of illustrations on the outsides of their teepees, the correct patterns on their clothing, the headwear that they would wear, the feathers that they would display, the patterns of their beadwork, all of those things. It's so common in Charlie's era, and also today. Sometimes people will display a Native American person, but they'll have the headdress of a Blackfeet with the tunic of a Navajo and the moccasin style of a tribe from New England. Right? They just sort of grab bag Native American culture without really realizing, wait a minute, no. Each tribe, and sometimes even groups within each tribe, had their own unique culture.
Right.
And their own unique appearance and way they did things and all these sorts of things. And I'm not saying he did it 100%, but generally what I've been told is Charlie was pretty good about not mixing the symbols of different tribes together. If he was showing the blood, he was showing the blood. And he wasn't putting in little bits of other groups. And I think that's really cool, kind of admirable. And I don't know if he did that on purpose. I don't know if it was a conscious thing. I think, again, maybe that photographic memory, he just, didn't mix up those symbols of a group. But anyway,
the thing that's amazing is so many artists nowadays, they take a picture of something or a slide and they project it and they paint it, and to me that's cheating. This is the real thing. This is in color, what they couldn't capture in color. Back in the late 1800s all the way through 1950s, you didn't have color photographs, and you're able to see what life was really like in real living color, and it has feeling to it. Mm-hmm. It definitely does.
For quite some time, we at the museum, we would use kind of a tagline of some historians work in watercolor and oil. So Charlie Russell wasn't a historian who was writing history books and taking notes, but he really captured a time and a place, and did it in a way that's generally historically accurate.
And isn't a picture worth 1,000 words?
I mean, I have quite a few more than 1,000 words. I think I've made that clear today. But Anyway,
Okay,
I'm so
you've
sorry.
got to go.
I have to go.
I really appreciate
Yes,
your time
no, it
today,
was my
taking
pleasure.
it with us. This is a different type of podcast than what I'm normally used to doing, but this has worked out great.
Yeah.
The C.M. Russell Museum is in Great Falls, Montana. I don't know if we covered that at the very beginning. I usually
Probably
introduce.
not. I just dove right in, didn't I?
You did, but we usually introduce, and here we are. I like to finish out my podcast by saying the world is full of wonder. People need to get out and explore. This museum takes you back in history to a place that the exploration is just unbelievable. And everybody have a wonder-filled day.
Absolutely.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?